Hello everyone, and welcome to an insane man rambling about an anime that he doesn't like for 30 seconds. Actually, probably a lot longer than that. Holy moly, I didn't expect it to be that long. SAO, also known as Sword Art Online, that's meant to be the other way around, is what most people recognize as the original popular isekai anime. Although the majority of the series does take place within an MMORPG instead of the standard fantasy world with MMORPG stats, let's see how interesting it would be to play as a game. I won't be talking about the characters because I'm not a writer, and I will not be talking about the art because I am not an artist. Now, before I go into this, I'd like to do a bit of engagement farming. What is the plot of Sword Art Online? Remember, I'm talking about the game, not the anime. I looked and asked around. Thank you to r/Sword Art Online for answering my question. But it turns out it doesn't have an overarching plot. It does have side quests, however, that are interconnected. However, those are squirreled away in the progressive books, which I'm not spending $200. But if you're anime only, you get to see exactly none of the side plots, as it was probably intended to be a sandboxy game for the player base to experience. There's an Arkham-like detective mode that allows players to track specific details of other players. However, it's not brought up much aside from the search for Sachi. The game uses a warp crystal system to teleport players from location to location instead of placing fast travel in a map, though this does require a verbal input or selecting the item and then where you would input the location. However, some locations become unusable to fast travel away, such as boss arenas and encounters. Parrying with weapons and shields often in RPGs are a flat but small damage reduction. However, due to the VR nature of the game, players can use these as an artificial wall for damage to be completely blocked in. The UI we first see within the game appears as a very simple login system with basic inputs and character saves. It's not too fancy, but then again, it doesn't need to be. It just needs to function as a player's time would be spent within the game world. The system uses a large amount of nested menus to make it easier on the player to find sets of related options. The style of player-to-player interaction over messages and invites is quickly limited due to the basic UI, causing it to be disregarded as useless, nearly, especially when the player base is trapped and able to communicate through voice chat. Underneath the player's health bar, it may display other party members' health in a smaller bar. The marker above players' heads is a simple way of indicating the type of character someone is playing by simplifying it into a traffic light system. Green being a default, player trying to complete environmental quests and mob slaying, yellow being a thing that exists, and red being any player who chooses to be a player versus player combatant, and any hostile enemy to battle against. The skill system is used to buff and affect melee attacks similar to any other MMO on a modern market. The game also does use defensive mechanics to block and stun enemies to assist other players who may require it. Sword Art Online claims to have an unlimited amount of non-magical skills. You name it, they've got it. Bang, 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 bang. Sword Art Online uses a very simplistic cast for basic fantasy enemies, using a mixture of races and beasts to create a very simplistic set of repeatable enemies. The main limiter for respawning the enemies is a timer, which means that early on players would be weaker than normal, as having 10,000 people all start an MMO at the same time would cause a large decline in the population of living XP. Throughout Sword Art Online, there are several floor-level bosses that do not respawn and dungeon-level bosses that may respawn. The first boss we see, Ilfang, is a kobold type, tying into the generic fantasy theming of a large portion of Sword Art Online's generic enemy variety. Bosses may also have a series of health bars instead of a singular one. Boss zones are seen as non-party or guild exclusive, allowing any random player to come in, slap them, and take the loot. When a boss is defeated, every player within the boss area shares a portion of the loot, with a unique item being given to the person who did the last bit of damage. Between the beta test of Sword Art Online and the Aincrad incident, the developers moved boss locations to give players who were in the beta the same level of knowledge as everyone else. The level system uses a lot of generic repeating zones and assets, good for games art and bad for player recognition. The game uses a lot of generic forests and fields to compensate for the scale needed for 100 levels. If an MMO took 2 months to beat, essentially the tutorial, that would be classified under a difficulty bug, which most studios, unless they're treating it as a Souls-like, would classify under a bug. For context, according to How Long to Beat, every category in World of Warcraft, including the DLC, takes 1.2 years to beat. Yes, the difficulty does ramp up with speed, but for Sword Art Online, using the first floor as a basis for level difficulty, it takes as long as February to beat a floor. Multiplying it by 100 and you'd get from November 6th, 2022, the date where they first go in, into July 7th of 2030, which is probably going to end up being when this video gets released, knowing my work schedule. Everything to do with Yui. Yes, it's completely plausible that a sentient AI could break out of some programming, but we're treating this as a game. It isn't important what an AI is hard-coded not to do, although players' mental health is important, unlike what your Overwatch games will tell you. AI, at least in this stage of development, shouldn't be able to self-repair and code itself out of a digital prison. I'm not going to bring up any of Heathcliff's BS because game masters in MMOs often do have unique abilities and skills and can make themselves immortal. Throughout the last boss fight against Heathcliff, Kirito doesn't die when his HP is reduced to 0. Why? Because Kirito's a Green Lantern. Asuna also breaks the coded limitations where they should not be able to move. Why? Well, the power of love conquers the limitations of Unreal Engine 5. To wrap this up and to quote SAO Abridged, this game feels like a rushed mess to release and please Metacritic and other net reviewers into seeing something cool before the genre takes off. Sword Art Online is an example of a game being held together by a developer working for several hours of overtime and sacrificing their bodies in an attempt to make a game to please everyone, but having enough flaws to fail at the starting line.